You are about to listen to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast, hosted by Craig Forrestall. Find Craig on Twitter at that_sports_guy. The That Sports Guys podcast is proudly featured by NFL Draft Diamonds, your draft coverage king. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some football talk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast. I am Craig Forrestall. You may know me from Twitter as at that_sports_guy. And today I'm happy to introduce Craig Domann, well-respected NFL agent of 360 Sports, based out of Colorado Springs. Some players that he has represented include Luke Rhodes of the Indianapolis Colts, the highest paid long snapper in the NFL, Dylan Cole of the Texans, Josh Hill Saints, Donovan Olumba Browns, DeAndre Levy, Damata Pico, and the list goes on. Craig, how are you today?
Great, Craig, man. I love your name, brother.
Hey, you know what? I'm happy that my parents gave it to me, too. It's not often that you got two Craigs in a room, so let's give the people what they want. Let's give them the Craig Show.
The Craig Show today. Craig 1, Craig 2. You be Craig 1, I'll be Craig 2.
Perfect. I love it. And so today what we're going to get into is we're going to talk football with Craig, and we're going to figure out exactly how he's been able to navigate the waters with the whole COVID-19 situation as it's related to him in his field of work, what he's noticed with different players, how it's affected and impacted mindset. And then we'll also ask him some parent-based questions as his son, JoJo, is a linebacker for the Nebraska football team. So we're going to jump right into it. And like I said, mindset is a key belief of yours, Craig. And I just want to give you a chance to plug your podcast because you're dedicated to the subject. And the Pro Mindset podcast is a wonderful listen in case anyone has not had a chance to take a listen. It's found on all major platforms, including Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and anywhere else you can get your podcast fix. So, Craig, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the name of the podcast is Pro Mindset Podcast, and what it is diving into the headspace of former players, NFL GMs, former head coaches, position coaches, you name it, anybody and everybody affiliated with performance. And so there is a pretty clear common thread with the players that have a pro mindset. And that is they have to have 7 things. You can't be light on any of them. It's not like a investment portfolio. One of them goes in the tank. The other 6 carry the day. You've got to have all 7. And the first one is you've got to believe in yourself. Then you have to have passion for you to be motivated. You got to know your why for what you do. And then the next one is you have to have winning habits. You have to be a hard worker. You have to have a lifestyle consistent with your dreams. And you have to be a competitive performer. And if you're missing any one of those, you're probably not going to play in the NFL.
And you just went through those 7 key components of mindset. And like you said, you just can't have one sit on the sideline and let the other 6 try to carry the load. But in your estimation or in your professional opinion, is one of those 7 elements more important than any of the others?
Well, I use the analogy of running the hurdles. And if you don't get over the first hurdle, you don't have to worry about the second one. And so the first hurdle is the most important one. And then after that, it's the next one. But the first one is belief in yourself, confidence in your skills. And there's a lot of things that are confidence busters. Coaches' criticism, media scrutiny, injuries, all these things can, when they draft over you. You're a starter in the NFL, and you wake up in a late day in April, it might be a Thursday night, and the team's drafted a guy your position in the first round. Guys typically take a little bit of a hit in their confidence when that happens. And so when guys have 100% confidence and belief in themselves, the ramifications are the coaches feel it, their teammates feel it, their opponents feel it, and it shows up on the field. And when they don't believe in themselves, sometimes coaches can't articulate why they don't like a player. They just don't trust him. Well, it's because they don't believe in him, because he doesn't even believe in himself. So belief is really, really huge. The second thing is, you know the old saying that when you've heard this saying, when talent doesn't work hard, hard workers beat talent. You've got to work hard. That's where your skill development goes. So let's say you're an offensive lineman playing in a spread offense in college football, and you really don't have to pass pro. You don't have to take on a guy for 4 seconds. You go to the NFL, hard work, watching film, working on your technique, being coachable, all those types of things are where you're going to develop your skill set so you can close the gap from where your skills are when you show up in the NFL to where your skills could go. And unfortunately, every year you look back 3 or 4 years and 50% of the guys that got drafted are no longer in the league, or they're considered busts. How can that happen? It's because their potential and their projection wasn't actualized. It wasn't maximized. And so the teams give up on them because they replace them with somebody who got drafted late in the draft or somebody that didn't even get drafted at all. And then the last one that I think is hypercritical is being a competitive performer. It's great if you believe in yourself. It's great if you love the game. It's great if you want to buy your mama a house and you want to make a difference in your community. It's great if you got great habits. You eat right, you eat clean, you get your sleep, you go see a chiropractor once a week, you do all those things. And you have a lifestyle that's consistent with your dream, meaning you're not partying all the time, you're not staying up late with women, you're not doing self-destructive things. But if you can't do it on 3 hours during the 3 hours of a game, when it matters, you're not going to be an NFL player. So I call that in the zone, being in the flow, being able to really capitalize on the opportunity of a lifetime, which might be a 4th and 12. It might be 4th and goal from the half-yard line, and the OC calls your number, and you're the running back, and this is your time to shine to win the game, or you could be a place kicker, and you're getting thrown in the game to kick a 52-yarder to win the game or not. Can you capitalize on that opportunity of a lifetime during the lifetime of the opportunity, which is usually one play? Some guys can, some guys can't, some guys don't. And so those are defining factors in a guy's ability to have longevity, to get a second contract, a third contract, to be a highly paid guy, to do what George Kittle did this week, do what Patrick Mahomes did this month. And that is basically cash in their chips from all their hard work and their performance and get paid.
And Craig, I want to ask you, starting out with you doing your homework on a player, and how does it work with this current season when players are opting out? With players opting out of the season, does that make it easier or harder for you to do your homework on a player you might have interest in representing?
I think it's very complicated, because now we're going to have an elongated period for the guys that opt out, or for the guys that play at schools where they're not going to play this fall and they may just choose to go train and get ready for the 2021 draft. I think there's going to be agents that are going to get fired in December. They're going to spend all this money training guys all over the place during the fall, and then the player's going to get bored. And some agent's going to get plant the seed like, hey man, you come with me, you can go in the first round. You're not going in the first round if you stay with that guy. So there's going to be a lot of volatility in the agent business over the next 8-9 months. The second thing is teams, we don't know if the SEC is going to play yet. I hope they do. The Big 12 and the ACC, I hope they do. We know the FCS programs have been shut down. We know the Big 10 and the Pac-12 have shut down. I believe those guys that play for those conferences that have been shut down are at a decided disadvantage to the other programs, the other conferences, because of the NFL teams. There's a recency effect. That's why guys, when they go to the New Year's Day bowl games and they have a big game, it boosts their stock because it's the last thing the teams got to see about that player. Whereas now we're going back to 2019 for what, 70% of the programs out there, 80% of the programs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be very interesting, and I think we started a trend in the 2020 draft wherein NFL teams played it safe. They drafted guys from big programs that played at the Power Five, that they knew their level of competition was quality, and they didn't have to do a lot of projection. What would this guy do if he played in the SEC? Because there's a lot of really talented young men that play in the FCS, but if they went to Alabama, they wouldn't get off the bench. And so you don't want that guy in the NFL because he's not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to find the guy that could play at James Madison, and he could transfer over to the University of Arkansas, and he could step right in and be a baller. So there's going to be more projections for the programs that have had their seasons canceled.
And you touched on something that was very interesting to me about the 8-month period of getting ready for the draft and draft preparation. What does that even look like? Do the trainers and the position coaches and specialists, do they even have a plan as to how to prepare over an 8-month window?
I think they're very smart. They realize they can't burn the guys out. This is not a 6-8 week cram course to get them ready for the combine so they can run a fast 40. This is really about a 6-month program to get them ready for the combine. And so I think it's going to be less intensive. It may be more beneficial for the players. For those players that have had injury history, they really should show up in Indianapolis and be 100%. And I think what's the X factor or the mystery that the NFL teams are going to have to deal with is who loves the game? Who's forgotten how to play because they were so focused on training and making money and being a pro that they forgot about the grind of really just being a football player. And unfortunately, in the NFL business, there's a group of guys that don't really love the game, and they're in it maybe for the wrong reasons, and they generally have shorter careers than they should. I think they're even going to have shorter careers than they would have had. And then for the guys that really love the game, doing it for the right reasons, they're focused on their performance more than on their bank account, their bank accounts are going to overflow.
What do you think is the most crucial mental element for these athletes as they get ready to prepare for the draft and they take on this extended process, this extended training process, because it's going to be a grueling task? What would be your one bit of advice to an athlete that's getting ready to take that on?
Well, I think it's a little bit like training for a sprint versus a marathon. But within the marathon, there's sprints. There's certainly a sprint the last half mile of the marathon, especially if you're neck and neck with another runner and you want to beat them. But there's also points in time in a typical marathon where you've got to kind of, push. It might be a hill, it might be, some obstacle in that course where if you can make ground up on your competition during that spot on the course. Well, my advice to young men would be understand it's a marathon, but it's really a sprint too. And I think that they've got to embark on more football activity, whether it's 7-on-7. The trainers, down in South Florida, instead of just focusing on their starts, they ought to get them out and let them play 7-on-7. Is it real football? No, but it's pretty dang close. Let a DB. You don't want a DB that's had so much off time to show up in training camp at an NFL camp next offseason, and he's rusty, and you took him in the first round. Well, reading route combos, getting on a hip, and having good ball skills and good ball reactions, You can't get that virtually. You can't get that watching film. You can't get that watching TV. You can't get that in the weight room.
Mm-hmm.
You can only get that by actually doing it.
And I want to transition now to a question for you that has a perspective as a parent, and then also from your perspective as a professional, as an NFL agent. How do you feel about a special eligibility situation? And that would be special eligibility would be granted to seniors from this fall. So the would-be seniors of this fall, they're given an additional year of eligibility next season if they opt out of the season, regardless if the program plays in the spring or not.
That's a great question. I think there's two issues in that, Craig. The first issue is, should the NCAA allow players that lost their senior season an opportunity to play again in 2021? And I don't think anybody could argue, because most of these young men are never going to smell the NFL. And they were planning on, it wasn't anything they did. Obviously, this pandemic, is affecting everybody. But it would be, I think, in the best interest of the sport, best interest of student athletes, to have an opportunity to do a do-over in 2021. And then I think the second question that you kind of, asked in there was, what about a guy that opts out? Let's say he plays at LSU and he decides to opt out. Should he be able to play again in 2021? I think you almost, again, have to err on the side of, why not let him play? We don't know the personal situations of these players' families. We don't know what kind of health history they may have. We don't know what kind of mental stress they may be incurring because of this pandemic. And quite candidly, that's going to be a very few number of players.
Mm-hmm.
Most guys that are going to opt out are opting out so they can go pro, not because they want to come back.
And I want to ask you about a bubble-like atmosphere being created for the NFL and then also for a college season. Now, the thing with the college season using a bubble format is the cost that would be going along with that, and most universities would not be able to take on that financial responsibility. But what I'm asking is, do you think a bubble is necessary for the NFL and or college season to take place?
Well, first and foremost, I think you have to divide and separate the NFL from college. So let's just focus on the NFL. These guys are paid professionals. If they decide not to opt out and they want to play football, for 4 months, they should do whatever they need to do to make the league happen. So if that requires a bubble, if that requires, the guys to stay in a hotel for the season, candidly, they should do it. Oil rig workers go away from home. They live in a lot less accommodations than a fancy hotel to do what they do to provide for their family. And I think for the health of our nation, for the advancement of normalcy, I think having an NFL season is critical. And unfortunately for some players, they might feel like they're getting taken advantage of because they're entertainers and they shouldn't be mistreated. Well, since I've been in the business, NFL players work on Thanksgiving. They work on Christmas. They do things that the average Joe doesn't have to do. But they also get paid a lot more money, and they also get a lot more downtime during their off seasons. Compare that to college. I think college is a whole different animal. I don't think if you have to resort to a bubble at the college level, I think it would be wiser to cancel the seasons and just play in 2021.
And so far, the NFL has reported player testing under 1% positive so far. And now, from your perspective, how has COVID-19 been handled through the NFL with the procedures and protocols that they have put in place?
I think with the guys that clients I've spoken with, I think it's fantastic. They're going above and beyond to make sure the player safety is number one. They're limiting the number of team personnel people that can be in the building. And, non-essential personnel are working remotely. Players are segregated. They're in smaller groups. If there's a way for the NFL to play football this season, which I believe will happen, it's going to be because of all the extra precautions the league's taken to make it happen.
And how are the players handling these new adjustments? Like you said, the smaller groups and different scenarios like that, based on the feedback that you've gotten, has it made a big deal to them or not really?
From my perspective, I think it's been a hassle if you're a core guy. If you're a starting 22 guy, you're already making 10, 15 million a year, it's a hassle. So you got to remember the NFL locker room is not made up of similarly situated people. So the one group of people is what I would call the elite guys. They've already been paid. They have whatever security you can have in the NFL, and this is a nuisance for them. And in fact, if the season didn't happen, they wouldn't miss a beat. Most of them want to play, but if the commissioner shut it down, they can still pay their rent. They would just have more time to look at their investments and to train and hang out with their families. Then you've got the guys in the middle class I'll call, that are maybe a step away, an inch away from getting that security. They want to play now so they can make it happen, so they can be in that elite group. And so guys in that situation will put up with whatever they got to put up with to make it happen. So it's not a nuisance for them. Then the third group is that group of players that a few are going to make it, most aren't. Like this year with the 80-man rosters, there's only going to be 11 players that are not going to make it. Everybody else is going to make it on practice squad or active 53. 11 are the only guys that are going to get cut. But it's a big difference paycheck-wise for a guy that's on the practice squad versus the active roster. For those guys, I think COVID has made the biggest difference because they don't get to perform in a preseason game. If they have the blessing and the belief from their coaches, they might make the team when they don't deserve to make the team. If they don't, they may not make the team when they would have otherwise made the team. So I think the most affected group of players in a locker room are the bottom 30, because the practices are limited, the contact's limited, full team practices is limited, no preseason games. I haven't seen yet how they're going to do their scrimmages, but it's all going to be inter-squad. And so in most cases, the 53-man roster that teams are going to end up with here in about 3 weeks, two or 3 weeks, is going to be the same 53 they thought it was going to be back in June. Where in a normal year, that's not the case. Chris Harris, Philip Lindsay just up the street in Denver, and obviously Chris Harris has moved on, but those guys didn't get drafted. And Philip Lindsay goes to the Pro Bowl as a rookie. Philip Lindsay in 2020 wouldn't even make the team.
It's a pretty eye-opening perspective. And I wanted to touch on something that you brought up in that answer when you were talking about the limited amount of reps for guys fighting to make a roster and also rookies with the no preseason games. How do you feel the no preseason games are going to impact this season when it comes to roster management and guys getting a look and being able to produce film for that next opportunity?
I think what it does is two things. One is that if you're better than they thought you were, you're not going to get a chance to show it. And if you get cut, you don't have any NFL film that the other 31 clubs can scout you on. So whatever you were in the system and scheme you were in college is what the other 31 teams are going to think of you. So what typically happens in an NFL is everybody still got their college grades on every player. But then when they watch them perform in the preseason, some stay the same, some get better, and some get worse. For those players that were going to ball out during the preseason and they were still not going to make their team. Maybe you're in Kansas City or San Francisco, 2 Super Bowl teams where they're pretty loaded. They don't have the space and the bandwidth for 5 undrafted free agents to make their team. But they do have, in a normal year, not this year, but a normal year, an opportunity to show the whole league what these handful of guys can do in the preseason so that somebody else can claim them on their 53. This year, they're not going to get claimed on the 53.
And now, Craig, before we get out of here, I wanted to finish it up with a question for you about your son, JoJo. He was actually the focus of a tweet from Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl executive director. And I just want to get your perspective on how cool it is to see him chasing his NFL dreams. And I'll read you the tweet now. 2 at Husker FB Nation prospects we expect to make jumps in 2020 are weak side linebacker JoJo Domann and defensive safety Deontay Williams. Domann has smaller man movement skills for a 235-pounder and upside as a sub-downs linebacker. And then he goes on to comment about Williams. So just how cool is it to hear that about your son and see where he has come with his football career?
Well, from a dad perspective, it's really cool that people even know who he is. From a professional perspective, I do believe he has some good skills. He does make plays. But for the fact that the Big Ten canceled their season, I think he was primed for a big-time 2020 fall. And this COVID thing has put a wrinkle in a bunch of boys' plans, including my own son's, where he may be faced with playing in the spring, playing in 2021. He's probably not of the caliber that it would make sense to opt out and just declare for the draft, because then he had 6 starts last year. He really started about 9 games. They put him in the second play a couple games. But the bottom line is, I just don't think it makes sense. So the thing I can do through my own son situation is be empathetic to a lot of players out there that were on the cusp of having a huge year. Joe Burrow is going to be the poster child for the guy that went from late draft pick undrafted before his senior year to number 1 pick, after his senior year. But there's only going to be one of those maybe every 20 years. But a lot of players improve their stock in their final season. And so JoJo, like a lot of guys, at least at this point, doesn't have that opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Craig Domann sharing his perspective on how COVID-19 has impacted the football world as he sees it, shedding some light on some different things as far as mindset goes as well. And do not forget to check out his Pro Mindset podcast. Craig, any final words?
Craig, I hope that the NFL plays an entire full schedule. And, I pray for everybody's safety out there, and that at some point in time we can get back to normal and college football players can do what they train to do all year, which is go play football. And I think that and then the last thing I'll say is that it's going to be really interesting to see how the NFL responds, if they even respond at all, to what's going on in the college world. Will they modify the combine by inviting more guys? Will they move the draft back later in the summer if we have a spring football season? Those types of things. It'll be really interesting to see if the NFL just says, hey, business as usual, and Jim Nagy says, hey, we're not going to be able to do a Senior Bowl, how that impacts the quality and the accuracy of the draft in 2021.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard about the keys to the NFL draft right there from Craig Domann. If there is not a decision made by the NFL on how they are going to intervene. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm Craig Forrestall for Craig Domann. Stay safe and be easy.
Hey everybody, Craig Forstall. Thanks for tuning in and listening to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at @that_sports_guy to catch all the latest updates and podcast episodes. Until next time, stay safe and be easy.